sort of the work that has happened thus far. And then I'm going to turn things over to Eric at the Massachusetts Cultural Council to fill you in on sort of what led to the production of the first ever national summit for creative youth development in Boston last March, and the national policy and advocacy agenda that was drafted during that summit. And then at that point, I think we'd like to really get into a discussion of how we can work with you all and what the future might hold. So I want to stress that creative youth development is a new term, but the field of practice isn't new. So what we're really talking about here are arts learning opportunities that are intentionally bridged with youth development principles. So while the field isn't new, there are definitely organizations and practitioners, many of whom, like yourself, have been at this for 10, 20 years. And the history of the field of practice could even extend beyond that. It is a field that up to this point has been fairly nascent and decentralized. And so what we're seeing here is a real opportunity to catalyze the field, but I want to be really clear that we're not saying that this is something completely new. It's really building on years of effective practice, really exemplary models around the country and even the globe. But it does, we have defined some sort of characteristics of the type of work. And so one is it is an intentional and holistic practice that combines high quality arts making or creative making. So we're talking about programs in the arts, humanities, and sciences where creativity is really the linchpin that connects them all. That combines really high quality arts learning with the development of life skills. So leadership development, cooperation, collaboration, communication, and has a specific focus on the whole person and really connecting young people to the communities that they live in and interact with and society. So it's sort of both and. These are asset-based programs, so programs that really position young people and at the center and look at their strengths and nurturing and development of those strengths. They're youth-driven. They set the bar very high in terms of both the learning that happens and the expectation of the youth. They're providing safe spaces, both physically and emotionally, for young people to grow and develop. They're fostering meaningful relationships with adults. So these are programs where there is not a sort of banking method of education where the educator is providing learning and the student just has to receive it, but there's really more of a mentoring relationship there. And they really do address the sort of broader community context in which these programs are operating. So as we get into sort of the advocacy agenda, there's a real attention to young people's role in terms of being agents of change. And that is something that we've addressed throughout the agenda. There's also an attention to sustained participation. So the difference here is that these are not drop-in programs. Not all programs out of the gate. Sustainability is something we might want to talk about on this call, but the intention is that this is a sustained interaction with young people and with the community, and that these programs develop over time. And again, creativity is at the center. And so we are, Eric's going to talk a minute about the summit that we produced and co-hosted, but I think the need was that we recognize that there are a lot of young people in this country that are feeling disconnected from their communities and don't have access to these types of programs. And at the same time, there are enormous shifts in economically, socially, technologically, in our world that are demanding creative solutions. And so there's this community of practice, we feel, that really can play a role in fostering young people's creative potential and their ability to participate actively in their communities and into society, and to help them develop and really into full, not that they're not already full, but into thriving adolescence and adulthood. And so I'm going to turn things over to you, Eric, which led us to kind of come together into a national partnership to think about how we can draw attention to this field and begin to, as I said, catalyze the development of this field so that together we can make a greater impact and increase access to these programs for all young people. Eric, take it away.
Sure. So I need to apologize in advance. My voice is almost gone, so I'm doing my best impression of a 1930s jazz singer. So I apologize if I completely cut out at any point. I'm Eric Coleman. I oversee Youth Reach and a new initiative at Mass Cultural Council called Sarah. Youth Reach was really the genesis for this work. 21 years ago, the Mass Cultural Council started funding what we call this work. Heather described it really, really well with some of the key characteristics, none of which are really new. Over the last 20 years, we've invested more than $10 million in the development of these programs around the Commonwealth and worked with other funders and other programs to really help build the capacity of these organizations. And on the 20th anniversary, we decided to throw a party, but it wasn't just a party full of drinks and cookies. We talked with the National Guild, the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities, the NEA president at this, and what we did was invite practitioners from leaders. We invited young people from around Massachusetts and really around the country to come together because there were these networks that were consistently growing around the country, not just in Massachusetts. And we thought it was time to get them together and say, well, there's a we out there. We don't really have a name for this work, but what is it we together do? So for 3 days in March of 2014, all of these people came together to create the policy and advocacy agenda that Heather is talking about. I realized that we had a grant deadline on Friday, and I did not send along a few materials for Wendy to share, but I can send them after this call. Out of that summit came this agenda, and Heather can talk a little bit more about some of the work that's happened since the summit. But I think one of the most meaningful things that happened was there was a real catalytic we moment. People looked around and recognized there was a community, that there was a lot of people invested in the kind of work that is happening in the programs that have been going on in Massachusetts, the programs that the President's Committee has been recognizing around the country since 1998. So, it was a moment to really begin working together instead of working in isolation. Since that time, what we've done is try to open the circle even more and to invite people who might not self-identify or are funded currently as creative youth development programs and talk to them about the things that Heather mentioned. There's really 6 key characteristics that we talk about that none of them are new. When we send out a survey to over 400 cultural organizations that we fund, things like creating and creating safe spaces, developing social capital. What we heard back was from most people that they're doing these things. And so our work here is really about bridging the gap between the hope that the arts can change young people's lives and change communities and the intentionality, the how to do it. So we're bridging that gap between hope and how. We're working with some of the best practices and emerging practices in the last 20 years and really trying to help cultural organizations who see needs in their communities among disconnected young people to use the arts and use these experiences as a real intervention. As part of our portfolio in Youth Reach, we fund about 43 organizations. We fund a lot of youth media programs. And in the last few years, we've seen an uptick in those programs because it's something that engages young people more and more in existing programs that begin to offer it. So as Heather said, I think this conversation is really relevant. And I think since the time of that summit, there's been some real progress in reaching new audiences and in really understanding where this work sits. And as a partnership, the Mass Cultural Council, the National Guild, the President's Committee, and Americans for the Arts have been having calls and thinking together. It's a really unique and dynamic partnership to think about how we can advocate and how we can implement the policy and the advocacy agenda. So Heather, I'll turn it over to you if you want to summarize some of the things that we've all done together in the last year.
Sure. Well, as Eric said, really the focus of the past year has really been on as Eric said, there were 200 stakeholders that participated in the summit. So they included providers of arts, humanities, and science learning opportunities for youth. They included funders, young people themselves, people, researchers. So the intention was to, from the get-go, really involve multiple stakeholders. But there were only 200 of us that convened, although that was a great number. But obviously the circle is wider, as today is an example of the opportunity to reach out to other folks. So we've been trying to really, one, continue the national partnership between the three organizations that co-hosted the summit, to keep the conversations going and really coordinate our efforts in this work, but also to reach out to other potential strategic partners in this work, to outreach to other networks. We've been presenting at conferences, starting to draft some written material to help put some clarity around what this term means and its significance and impact. But really the focus has been on increasing awareness and understanding of CYD, both within the arts and starting to identify stakeholders beyond the arts sector as well, including education and workforce development, youth development, et cetera. So I think that has really been the core piece of our work. We have developed some web resources, which I think Wendy has or can share with you. And then looking towards the future, we're starting to plan for a national creative youth development website. We've been talking to a number of thought leaders in this work around the country, as well as young people and other stakeholders, around what does it look like to develop an online community of practice that it not only engages folks in the arts, but the other stakeholders in other sectors that we want to engage in conversation around this work. So really starting to think about what the content of that website might be, what the functionality of it might be, how would it serve these different audiences and really exist in a dynamic way. What role does this website play in terms of helping us document and communicate the impact of this work? And so that might be something we want to discuss as a group, and what involvement youth media could play in that. So we're just getting out of the gate around that and hoping to kind of put together a proposal that we can share out more broadly to the funding community and to others who might want to invest in the further development of a website. And then I think more broadly, Wendy, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about the potential for collective action, and I think that's something that, again, we've identified as critical to the development and advancement of this field. So I think that's a piece of that too, and is certainly one of the imperatives that was identified as part of the agenda. John, I want to make sure to include you. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add in terms of the just sort of introduction to this work and sort of our thinking around it. John is, in addition to his role at SACC, is also the chair of the Guild CYD network within our membership. So he's been integral from the very beginning in the Guild's role in leading up to the summit and even the agenda itself. So.
Yeah, that would be great, John, to hear. John, unmute yourself first. Unmute yourself.
We can't hear you.
Yeah.
As my staff would say, that would probably be a great thing if I could. I'm Johnny Hinojosa. I'm the Artistic Executive Director of SACC, Creative Youth Development Program, multidisciplinary here in San Antonio. And as Heather said, I am the chair of the CYD working group within the Guild. But the other piece of it is that Cassandra and Cassandra and Spyha and SACC were part of the Wallace's Something to Say report that came out a while back that really sort of dovetails into creative youth development. But I would just say from a NAMAC standpoint in this opportunity for cross-sector and sector opportunities is that you fit really nicely into this mix and how things are moving forward. And because part of the focus is this shared measurement and this collaboration and these opportunities to connect, especially when it comes to assessment and data. So it makes a whole lot of sense that you guys are involved and part of this community. The other piece that I would say that has been important to the work that we do, but needs to even be strengthened, is the voice of our young people in this. And that's another area where you can be really effective. While we had a great group of young people as part of the Boston Summit, and while we had some young people at the Guild conversation that we had as a pre-conference to this last fall, the more that we can get more young people involved, especially when it comes to the equity part of this, is going to be really important.
Whoops, sorry.
So Wendy, I think that's it in a nutshell. We can dig into some, new specific questions about the future, but I think that's kind of the summary.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think I'm really curious for, those on the call, Jade, Sheila, Nicole, Peter, do you guys feel that, are you feeling the creative youth development vibe? I mean, in your work, does it feel, from what you know now, and I mean, I'm sure that you all were familiar with creative youth development on some level, feel that you're already doing it. I would love to kind of just get going a little bit with a little back and forth of, where's the energy from youth media? Clearly, in my mind, youth media organizations are doing creative youth development. Having been at BAVAC for 8 years, I could see youth being developed over time through this work. And, we always talked about, why don't we have a social worker on site? The kids would come in and their families had been, literally parents murdered the night before, and then they're coming in to learn video the next day. I mean, that's the reality. And so this all fits into, and then the job placement. I mean, everything that program did was more than just about making great, powerful video stories. And so when you hear this work, is this something that you feel like we as a youth media field should be getting involved in? Let's just join the group? Do we need after we do some research, do we need our own kind of separated platform? What are the ins and outs of all of this? Certainly I have a lot of opinions on this matter, but right now, they're much less important than what you're thinking right now. And I would love anyone to jump in, just based on what we've heard so far.
Can I say something about profile? I think the problem that we found when we did the studies for NAMAC that are now on Youth Media Report, if you're curious, I think that what we found was that there is a lot of demand for youth media programs, but the capacity is very low. We also found that they weren't venturing into digital media making as much as we had expected. So if you have a high profile, you're expected to deliver, but if you don't have the capacity, then you've got some problems. And so maybe to see not only how you are the pioneers of creative youth development, which we can talk more about what that means too, but also how you fit into a larger universe or system of maker movements and informal education sites and so on, so that not only will you have to shield the burden of that high demand for your skill sets, but perhaps you can find strategic partners who can help you navigate as you, and I wouldn't call this a field particularly, but this is a really important field building exercise, and I do think it's an emerging field.
Can you talk, Kathleen, just a little bit more about what this emerging field consists of as you see it?
Well, the problem is, everything has affordances and constraints, everything. So when you put youth development with art, you got some tension. And when you put social justice in the mix, also you got an extra element that's great, but also potentially sort of blocks consensus. And field building is about some consensus. So I think it's great, but it's not settled, and maybe it never would be or should be. But when you say a field, you mean you have broad consensus, and I think that you do, but especially around social justice, which has a political element, you're always going to have different factions. The problem I see with art is that, and believe me, I see this not as storytelling at all, but as aesthetic values and freedom of expression and personal expression, as well as collaborative team making. So now I see, in maker movements and Department of Ed and interdisciplinary STEAM, blah, 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 I see them talking about, design And my opinion is it's because they don't want to talk about art. They'd rather call it design because it has a very applied meaning, and workforce development,
problem solving.
Yeah, youth development, blah, blah, blah. So when you talk about art, it's messy, especially the fine arts. I mean, they don't want their kids to go out and be Banksy, right? So those are the kinds of things that create really interesting tensions.
This is so fascinating. Yes, Sheila, please go ahead.
I want to chime in on that a little bit and just say that I very much agree that when you're looking at creative youth development, you're talking about this much larger concept that so many different full-time and community organizations can fit into, and youth media is just one tiny part of that pie. And so when you pull youth media into something like that, you risk taking away how nuanced it is. And there have been a lot of conversations recently about, like, well, what is youth media? And maybe it's, just looking at it, maybe it makes more sense to be focusing on redefining what youth media is before trying to lump it into something else. But I do think that there's a huge amount of value in this because it's really showing the differences of what you're getting in out of school time compared to in school. Because what we're seeing so much right now is this sort of, like, we're seeing the national art standards for putting media in schools for young people. So we're seeing the need for this with young people throughout our country. But this helps kind of state the case about the importance of the mentoring component as well. So I'm not trying to devalue that in any way, just chiming in to say that I do think that youth media has its own very kind of, like, special thing, and I very much protect that,
Yeah.
I think there is also a little bit of conversation about looking at the sort of collective impact of youth media, and when you're looking at, it's true when you have individual organizations, your capacity is very small. Mm-hmm. And when you're linking the organizations together on a national level, you're doing something very different. And one of the things, we've had a crazy week here in Baltimore. And I think that one of the things that we wanted to mention today was this really incredible thing that happened with youth radio, where youth radio from Oakland reached out to us, and they were like, well, we have the distribution that we can help you with to tell your youth stories of what happened in Baltimore this past week. And I'm going to probably be chatting articles throughout while we're talking, but it was something really lovely where it showed us how quickly when multiple organizations are doing distribution together, how much that expands the reach for all parties. And that was something really special that we're really lucky to get to be part of.
Sheila, that's so great to hear. And of course, we were on a pre-call earlier today to prepare for this call. And I was like, I'm not sure we're going to get to this. And of course, we're getting to where I thought we might not have time to get to right away, which is, and it was brought up by Kathleen and echoed now by Sheila, about this notion of what does collective impact even mean for us? Does it mean collaborating with each other for deeper impact within our sectors? Or does it mean more strategic partnering with social sector organizations working on those issues that we care about and making sure that creativity and arts and media is embedded there and being able to track deeper impact because of that? And I think both projects are interesting. I'm wondering, John, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but it got mentioned on the pre-call that you have some experience in the collective impact realm. Are you in a place you could share any of that?
Yeah, I'm doing some work on a local basis, and here's what I have to say. I get those perspectives that just were stated, but what we all recognize and understand, especially in creative youth development or youth development in general, it's a very complicated process. This is not just about the arts. It is about creating leaders and giving them the opportunities to lead and to be able to help and support them as they're moving forward in their lives. So it's a really complicated issue. What I would just say in why I think youth media fits within that context is SACE is a multidisciplinary arts program. We're not just a media program. We're not just a performing arts program. We're not just a visual arts program. We do that all with our young people because we all recognize that they all have special needs and interests and capacities. And so if SACE can make that commitment in a multidisciplinary perspective, youth media should be able to do that as well, I think. But again, understanding the complications. I am one of the chairs of a group here in San Antonio called Excel Beyond the Bell. And I'm sort of like the art stepchild within this organization, because there's only, of the 32 members, 3 of us. And the only reason that there's 2 more is that I brought them in to the work. So what we do is we're focusing on collective impact from the perspective of just youth development during the out-of-school time hours in San Antonio. And the parallels are so similar because, again, there are some specific conditions that you look at when you look at collective impact or collective action, and there is differences in focuses, and it is a collaborative nature, and it is all sort of this buy-in of how we move forward and how we assess and how we look at things that is part of that thing that rolls it forward, and that's where things get complicated. Again, but it is vital and important if we're looking at creating our city and our country's new creative leaders.
Can I ask you just one question? In that scenario where you're bringing the arts into this larger collective impact thing, are all the organizations involved tracking their impact with a set of shared goals, so that the art organizations and the culture organizations have come up with a set of shared goals that they're all working towards collectively?
Yes, so it's a work in progress. Shared measurements is part of the 5 conditions of collective impact, so it is something that you have to look at. Ours are a little different. We had looked at them on a national level when we were meeting as a pre-conference with the Guild, and recognized that this measurement that we're now piloting within the context of Excel Beyond the Bell may not fit necessarily with the national movement, but I'm sorry, excuse me. Sorry. You know what's hard about video conferencing? You can't multitask. You have to pay attention. But we're using the Search Institute's 40 developmental assets as a measurement tool, because we see the thread and the bar that works within the context of the local group. But we did have a conversation about that on a national level in November, and recognized that it maybe isn't the perfect fit, but it is a good additional shared measurement for some organizations. So that's going to be some of the work that needs to happen within the national focus of creative youth development. We're sort of in the common agenda area, and where we have to now make decisions on is the shared measurement, the reinforcing collaborative activities, the communication and conversations, and then ultimately who is the backbone organization for the work that we do. But what I do know is we have some pretty strong national partners in Massachusetts Cultural Council, the Guild, and the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Because when we think about a backbone organization, when I think about when we talked earlier about the website, my brain thinks, who's running that website? Who's taking on the responsibility of the content, the management, the cost, and which, is that the backbone organization? Is it a separate freestanding NGO you have to create? And how do we ensure that artists have an equal stake and place at the table when it comes to once you move from agenda setting to actual, to measurement and goals? And it's much more difficult to measure the impact of the creative contributions. And we have to really, that's where our political stand will come and say, and really refuse to be evaluated in ways. It's not going to be test scores. It's not going to be, it might not even be number of bodies, but we can, I think, really, when we come to the table together, really decide what are those measurements once we get there. But I think, John, it's really helpful to hear where you're at, and that it's definitely a work in progress, so that those youth media organizations on this call can think about how they could step into a larger initiative like that. What would each of you bring to the table, and how we could then incorporate that. But I think what's seeming to me that I would like us to, maybe we could form some kind of working group where we actually look at the work that has already been done here and really start to to see what kind of thing that we can co-publish potentially off of the work that Creative Youth Development has done to honor everything that's been done so far, and then find our place in that, as Sheila was saying. But who else? Anyone else? Jade, Dan, Peter, feeling like jumping in? Cassandra?
Yeah, actually, if I could jump in, that'd be great. So I just pulled up alongside, the Zoom window here, the policy and advocacy agenda that was put forth. And this is, when I review this, every time I review this, there are various levels of work here. There's both a local, there's concentric rings, if you will. There's, young people at the center, but if you kind of move outwardly, there's young people, and then their sort of potential organizations that they are involved in, and or within your organization, say like, youth councils or, youth action committees, what have you. Many of us have those a part of our programs. Then you go out one further and it's organization. Then you go out one further, it's community. Then you go out one further and it's national. So I am just wondering, I think that there are multiple levels of engagement here that can be tailored to your capacity as an organization. And I'm just wondering, Heather or John or Eric, how you guys see advancing this agenda, and what I'm kind of wondering is if we could, as a body, as a group, start to dissect this agenda a little bit more and just bite off parts that actually are suited for our organizational capacities. Because, as Kathleen said earlier, there is something for everybody here in this agenda. And I'm just wondering, like, what we want to do as youth media, do we want to say, okay, we're going to sign on to this? Is there something, I'm kind of asking a question and talking at the same time. Sorry, you guys, but like, have you guys put together any sort of, what would you say, like a memorandum of understanding, our organization signing on, and what are they signing on to? And what is it that we can do in order to be able to disseminate this information and sort of help our groups and others understand that this isn't an all or nothing thing. And there's a possibility that people can get involved depending on, their capacity and their organizations and their programs and so forth. So Heather, what are you guys doing now to sort of advance this work? And, what can we do as youth media organizations in order to be able to, like I said, bite off what we can chew?
Yeah, and keeping in mind that we're going to need to make the case to the youth media organizations, many of whom are NAMAC members, how it will benefit them back in their communities on the ground to do this work. And I don't know if to me, it seems pretty clear once to put the language and framing around it means that we can better track our impact, that we will be more abundant, we'll be able to attract more funding, we'll be able to scale the programs that need to scale. Without this, I don't think that scaling is possible, because people will just think it's just a bunch of kids running around with a video camera. And we need to be able to tell that story of what's happening. And so if you're already, if there's a way in that has already been articulated for our organizations, I can definitely see wanting to jump on something like that.
Yeah, and Eric and John jump in as we go. I think, we're 1 year out. And so really, as I said, the focus of this first year was to even get some clarity ourselves around how we want to identify this field. And we've had a lot of, I think, rich conversations and heated conversations about, how firm do we want those boundaries of definition to be? How big we want the tent to be, or how little, and what does that mean? And so I think this conversation is right in line with that, right? So Sheila, your comment of like, do we want to preserve youth media and the integrity of that as something separate? What does it mean to be piece of a bigger pie? I think those are really important questions, and ones that we've been trying to really address along the way. So I want to stress that it's sort of evolving as we have conversations like this. And Cassandra, I think your point of those multiple points of entry is really critical too. So I think and I'll just speak for myself. I mean, I think when I look at the document, it's going to mean different things to different people. And in fact, in the Eric brought up in our planning call, at the close of the summit, we actually asked people, individuals, not organizations, not the caucuses, but individuals that participated in the summit to stand up and pledge a commitment to action. So that could be about themselves. It could be about going back to their organization and motivating, forming a teen board. It could be talking to their trustees or a new funder, or it could be as big as organizing a collective impact strategy in their city. So even those actions were scaled. And I think that's really critical to keep in mind, is that this is going to mean different things to different people. So I think one piece is looking at these imperatives as what does this mean for my own work, whether that's individually as an artist or within my organization or my city. I think starting there. And then as this group, what does this mean for us? Like, what do we want it to mean? And then I think I would speak for the guilds is, we want it to be an evolving dialogue with people who are interested in moving this forward. So I don't think we have an agenda of we don't know necessarily the B, but we're trying to scaffold to get there. And so I think, and then it's a little bit of which comes first, the chicken or the egg, so if you look at those imperatives, we've been trying to grapple, to be.
Oh, Heather, we lost you for a second.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you. Go back to just as you were saying something, the last important thing you said.
Well, if I cut out, Eric, just dive in there.
Yeah.
But I think a piece of this too is which comes first, the chicken or the egg. So do we need to be able to document and communicate in a bold way what these programs are and their impact in ways that multiple stakeholders can not just understand the work, but want to develop the work with us. I think that really came out of the caucus in that area, was that we're not talking about advocacy in the way of we just want attention and awareness. We want to evolve the work in partnership with those that we engage, and that it is a meaningful partnership with substance and with mutual goals and all the things that John talked about, not about just drawing attention for more dollars, although it would be great to leverage more resources in that process. So I do think, Cassandra, it is scaled and those points of entry are varied. Eric, John, I don't know if you want to jump in and add anything there.
Yeah, I think a word that Heather just used is really an important one here to understand, is that what we're talking about right now is a dialogue. This is not a set of standards. It's not an in or an out. I don't know how you are in creative youth development. I mean, we have grant programs that support with public money work that employs the best practices and has a deep impact on young people, but we don't really look at the cultural ecosystem of Massachusetts and say, well, you are and you are not. There's a bigger we here. I don't know any of us on this call that would believe that the arts don't have an impact on the lives of young people. So we need to be careful not to paint it as an either or a black and white, and also not to jump too fast into the policy agenda. The policy agenda, as Heather said, was crafted by 225 people who came together and believe in something together. So there was a lot of groundwork. There was 20 years of conversations and work that happened that brought a specific group of people into that room and said, yeah, we want to do this together. And what we found is that when we talk about this work, there are more and more people who want to get on that boat. I think, as Heather said, there were 225 people at the summit. There was the entire sort of fields of the arts and education and social work and health, minus 225 people that were not there. So at this point, this is really just a conversation about where this exists out in the world and where it can be. And there is a core group of people who have come together and implicitly believe and value the work and the impact they've had on young people. But right now, I think that the conversation is about, what is the impact maybe youth media has on the lives of young people and on communities? We need to start at a very basic point before we jump too far into, analyzing cross-sector impact and partnerships. That's great, but what's the thing? It's a simple question, what's important to you? And for the people who crafted that agenda, what's important to them is the impact that the arts can have on young lives and communities, especially those at most risk of not making a successful transition to adulthood. So it's definitely not a binary, and we're still learning every day the real openness and reach of this work.
It's so great to hear, because I think of all the work that everyone's doing, the stuff that's coming out of BAVAC and SpyHop, and in some cases it is storytelling, and in other cases it's, there's so much of what that work is as we go into technology and photography and all the rest of it, and design even as well, that the expressions of creativity that they could actually, that this whole movement could be broadened and be inclusive of everything that's actually going on the ground in our spaces now as well. That there's not a need, as I'm hearing, tell me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't feel like there's a need to reinvent the wheel here. Sheila, I know you first mentioned we have to see what our unique voice is in this, but based on everything that these, the CYD leaders are saying, it feels like, to me, that once, we could sort of, youth media can meet as a posse and say, what is it that we're bringing uniquely into this conversation, and then have it be part of the larger effort to bring, attention and scholarship and, and all the rest of it into this field. Because articulating what is the impact of youth media, that is, it's a huge, huge, huge question, and to which there are so many answers. And I know BAVAC has done videos, with the kids about what's been the impact on your life and your life and your life. And the stories are breathtaking. And so, they need to be collected and I think added to this very incredible pot.
Could I?
Please.
There is a lot of evidence out there. The problem is I don't think we have done the kind of academic research that provides the evidence for policymakers and funders. Because we've done a lot of small-scale qualitative, a lot of very big stories. There's really a big interest around informal education right now, and real opportunity. People really want to take a closer look at youth media organizations like yours as sample groups in a very rigorous and systematic way. And that kind of evidence, especially when it's aggregated across this many organizations, is really powerful. And it's not just, the best practices and the impact. It's also the lessons learned from the things we did that didn't work. That's also, there's no negative to that I found. Part of the problem is we don't get enough federal grants, and federal grants, they require this kind of evaluation, but even the federal government doesn't aggregate it and have the same measurements like they could. So one thing that right now the Department of Ed's doing, that IC3? Is that what it's called? The Convergence Academies in Chicago got one of these to test out some of the areas around this more informal experimental pedagogies and things. And if you get a grant like that, you get evaluation, right? So in your communities, there are universities nearby who really want to look at this. And so why not do it? Like that Massachusetts study was so good, but I was looking through the whole thing for the methodology, but it's a policy document. I'm not going to find the methodology there. And that's what these funders and these policymakers look for, that more rigorous kind of academic stuff.
Mm-hmm. And they want the rigorous academic stuff, but really illustrated with boots on the ground examples, the real work. To me, it's more interesting in that case, and we're working on, NAMIC's working on now a new kind of interactive case study that actually combines the hard and data and analytics with video and audio and the stuff that is actually the language we speak. And I'm hoping those will move as they're launched, we're working with MIT on these, that they'll become more part of the lexicon, and we can actually get some, some really interesting data that is both anecdotal and, and the hard stuff.
The Guild just recently revised its strategic priorities, and one of those strategic priorities is to look at developing partners with higher ed to build more knowledge about community arts education and its impact, and certainly CYD is a part of that. And so we've been thinking about, in the next 3 to 5 years, how do we, in this work, look to organizations around the country as sites for research, where we can really couple higher ed, universities and colleges, to use them as case studies for research and to demonstrate impact. I think that is definitely an area that has been identified as a need for growth.
I think we got to think beyond case studies and qualitative too. Right. And we have a lot of that even from the early 90s, and it's good stuff, but it's not enough to make inferences from the evidence.
That's right. And sort of looking at what indicators are other fields using to measure impact, and how do we align how we're measuring this work with those that we want to partner with.
And I think that notion of identifying the leading indicators, Gates did a lot of work last year and the year before on leading indicators of impact in media arts. And after spending $1 million at least just investigating what those might be, the end result was really, it's a bit of an oversimplification, but really there's no shared indicators. And that each project, so that we're looking for for an individual documentary on any given subject, journalism, anything like that, don't even bother trying to come up with the shared indicators. Only figure out what is relevant in your project and moving forward. And I think, someone's getting a lot of background noise. 5582126. I think that's Bayvac. You got a lot of background noise. Could you mute yourself? Thank you. So I think it's worthwhile to take a look at if there is a way that we can. Are there some leading indicators that do emerge that don't delimit the individual strands of these projects, and how do we embed those projects, especially in the media arts? How do we embed those projects into the issue areas in ways that feel organic and useful and valuable? And without having to completely take on the indicators of impact of those NGOs that are leading that, but trying to come up with some kind of relationship and some kind of measurement tool that can be about contribution as well as attribution. And I think for us, it's really important. Yeah. John?
I want to ask my...
Oh, wait, who was that?
Sorry, this is Sheila. I've been trying to just something to throw out with the group too that I'm just a little unclear on as we're kind of talking about this, and maybe it's too large of a question and this is a different conversation another day, or maybe it's a very simple question. But as we're looking at all of this, what is NAMAC's role in creative youth development?
Yeah, let's put that on. Let's put that on at the as a way to wrap up this call. That's exactly what we're going to start asking. So let's do John, then Nicole.
Thanks. So I want to talk about the investment and the impact piece of it. That's the more complicated one. And as part of the imperatives of the work that we did, we talked about investing in capturing and analyzing impact through shared language systems and tools. The thing about creative youth development is that there's multiple ways of being able to impact it. And as you all know in work in the arts, is that you always get in trouble because you can show strengths and you can show access and you can show improvement, but the question always becomes, well, how can you tell us that that's isolated specifically for the visual arts or the media or anything else? And so we sort of get into trouble with those kinds of things because the piece for us that works, and this is the kind of conversation that needs to move forward within this national conversation, is there are multiple ways of having to do it, unfortunately. For SAC, every 6 weeks, our students turn in their report cards, and we not only evaluate them based on their commitment to their education, but whether we see improvement based on looking at the public schools that they attend. The other piece of it is the 40 developmental assets. The other piece of it is that we actually survey and improve our work based on what the kids tell us is important to them. The other piece of it, that we're very proud of is that when you look at the graduation rate from high school and going on to colleges and universities from our program versus the public schools that our students attend, night and day. So there's a whole bunch of ways. It's not a simple piece. It's a really complicated piece, but it is a conversation that needs to move forward. The other thing that I'll say is that one of the things, I'm a person that is somebody that wants to move forward really quickly. And I sort of get into trouble, and I know I got into trouble with Tracy because what I think is that we need to convene again. We need to have additional conversations about this. The summit was important and the pre-conference at the Guild was important, but if we're going to keep this moving, we have to continue that energy in that kind of an opportunity. But what I can tell you is that the other piece of this that I'm really proud of what the Guild's doing, and in many ways Massachusetts Cultural Council, is that, we're looking at this website. We need a digital toolkit for this work. And that's the way that we convene everybody in a digital way, sort of like what we're doing now, and having those voices and opinions heard from a wide field of people doing this work.
John, is there a sense of who would pay for that development and design, and who would host it and kind of own the site?
Well, I'm going to get into trouble with Heather and maybe Jonathan, but I believe that the National Guild is the organization on a national basis, in addition with support and partnerships, that really it's community arts education, right? And part of its initiatives and part of its focus is creative youth development. So I think that there's resources and available. What we found here locally, Excel Beyond the Bell, we've moved fairly quickly and have moved to create a backbone organization, and people are coming to us as opposed to us looking for funds, saying we want to help, we want to support. We just got a major grant to hire a full-time director and a part-time administrative assistant because we've been doing all of this work voluntary-wise.
Wow, that's incredible.
The organization. So I think when people start seeing that sort of cumulative opportunity to really sort of move, that I think the resources will be available for the work.
Thanks so much. Nicole, you're up next.
Yeah, I think that I just wanted to, in thinking about this idea at Impact, and you mentioned here at BAVEC, we talk to our students all the time and do surveys, and I'm our youth coordinator, so I work with our advisory board, and so I'm very much able to see the impact on our youth, whether that's in terms of graduation rates or just seeing confidence develop over a semester. I think something that's been really exciting, though, to share is kind of the impact that our youth can have on external stakeholders, and why supporting programs like Next Gen or supporting youth media programs is not just, for funders or for strategic partners, is not just kind of like a nice thing to do, but actually how that relationship can be really symbiotic. And I think as BAVEC has started to partner more with the city and with different nonprofits, really being able to share what we already know, which is that it's not just young people running around with cameras, and it's not just, it's not empty to say that their voices have value and bringing in more diverse voices to media has value, but really being able to see how does it benefit a Twitter, for them to come in and allow our young people to talk about the ways in which they use their platform. That's incredibly beneficial for, a company to engage with youth. Or how is it beneficial for the city of San Francisco, for whom our students are making films about water usage. And so I think when I think about impact, being able to frame it that way and kind of share the impacts that the young people that our organizations work with have had, even just outside of their own lives, is also incredibly useful when it comes to partnership building and sharing evidence of that. So
thank you. That was really well said. I mean, I think that is the case,
mm-hmm.
and the proof of concept for a a collective impact strategy that includes young artists embedded into certain movements, like what was going on with, the kids making water usage films, absolutely. The idea that you could actually track, the impact and the kind of embedding those films into those movements. What was the ultimate, what happened then that probably would not happen if those films hadn't gotten made. But even deeper, a model like We Own TV, which is a youth media organization on the ground in Freetown, Sierra Leone, that was started by some local filmmakers. What's happened there is, it's beyond unbelievable, where the kids who they were just taking media classes and now they're running their own media center. They're being hired by brands doing business in Africa, wanting authentic voices. And one of them just got a Sundance grant to make his next film. It's like, it's been such an extraordinary journey that is not singular. And it's happening around the world where these kids are, and communities are starting to see these benefits. And I think us coming together with creative youth development can actually amplify that in some really, really interesting ways. So thank you for bringing that up, Nicole. I think that's really important. So I'm just doing a time check. It's 2:06. We have commitment to wrap by 2:30. So which means in about 10 minutes, we're going to start our real wrap. So I want to make sure to get everyone's voice in who might have been quiet up until now. Lucia, you've been sharing a lot of stuff on the chat. Is there something that's coming up that you'd like to share in voice?
I've been thinking, as we're discussing, about the intersections and correlations in process between what happened with the national arts standards recently being remodeled and sort of their process around that, how they came together, and with the media arts standards being new for the first time, just how that process came about. I think that that's really intriguing, that the actual Richard Burroughs and Dane Olson going into classroom and say, what are your indicators, starting from ground zero, what is the impact? But then I also thought about how we have to be really careful, because we're not just talking about assessment, we're talking about impact. And classrooms in traditional education are focused around assessment as it directly correlates with standards. Whereas when we talk about impact, we're talking about looking outside of the box. I think that, the real challenge is just finding who will lead the charge, that I think, that actually can galvanize and organize all of the groups. I think that everyone in the movement and that's doing the work is ready, and ready to form organizing groups and, do more. But I think it would be amazing if it was something National Guild, a partnership with a higher ed education. I'm thinking about some major funders. We worked here in Chicago. We worked with the Chicago Youth Voices Network, which Free Spirit is a part of. Worked with the McCormick Foundation for about two years to do a long-term impact study, and that's what I shared with you. And some of you were in that session with our executive director at Free Spirit to sort of learn about that project. And I'm thinking about how that was come about and how they first identified their indicators and then went from there. And working with a research center that McCormick Foundation put faith in really helped give the report some validity in the field. But I'm also reflecting on, what is that report being used for now?
Exactly. That's really the last thing I want to do, is make a white paper that people take a look at and say, that's cool. And then It's back to business as usual. It's a waste of everybody's time. And so it's good to have especially as youth media people, to just do a research-based white paper. We can do more. We have the tools and the power, and we also can, the voices of the people that we work with, the youth themselves, can be part of this process in a way that, we just have to be really intentional from the very beginning about creating that framework for it. And So thanks a lot, Lucia. That's really helpful.
And I just want to mention one other thing too, and being clear from the start, like what is the goal, for what purpose? And it's always, well, for more funding, but like what exactly do we as a movement want to get out of that work, and having a clear sense of that from the get-go, so that can inform the immense time and labor that is put into it.
Are you talking about things like, what do we, do we want more kids in college, or more, moving kids out of poverty, or, is that what you're meaning there?
No, I mean more of individual organizations in the field saying, what impact do we want this research to have? Because we all, we don't all necessarily want to say we want more program participants. We want more recognition at a local level. So really determining, sort of in some ways, both the big vision, like I love that IBM's big vision was that everyone has a computer, in 15 years. And that was crazy, but they got there. Mm-hmm. So having both that big vision and, again, those indicators for if we come together, if we produce something, we know that it's been effective if we hit these indicators as a field.
Yep.
I think one of the other things that we need to think about when we talk about assessment is that it's not about impact or proving something all the time. Assessment helps our programs get better. It helps us know if we're doing our work well, and there's not going to be a magical arrow, and there's not going to be any fact or figure that sways someone in their mind that way. Funders, speaking as a funder, priorities change all the time. Hughes Reach has been around for 20 years, but every 3 to 5 years there's a new idea, and we go that way. Wallace Foundation pours a ton of money into exploring it, and then they change their mind. So it's something that we need to. The conversation right now, I think, is more about having a community to share what we're doing and understanding what's important and learn best practices, share evaluation tools, not reinventing the wheel, so that we have impact on young people. Exactly. I think funders want to fund great work, and there's not a lot out there. It's really hard to do this work. So instead of trying to appease a funder, I would say lead with great work. Mm-hmm. Focus on your young people all the way through, and you'll have the impact that you need. You'll have the attention that you need. We kind of put things backward sometimes. And when we go on site visits and, we see materials, we have a 3-year grant cycle. Nobody's going to prove anything in 3 years. Mm-hmm. They're just not going to, you can't promise the moon if you only have enough gas to get to Framingham. So, that really helps people focus on doing things that they can do, and then reaching out to others to help do more of it, or do deeper work or something like that. So let's not get lost in data or lost in evaluation in only one sense.
Dude, I like how you think. That's awesome. Kathleen, you had something? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think that you already have a lot, well, I'll just use an academic term, hypotheses, which correlate to goals in a way, your hypotheses. And just for example, a lot of talk about collaborative participatory learning. Well, it'd be interesting to know if that works all the time. All these designs of the learning environment, you could parse that out a little bit. And I kind of disagree about white papers or reports, because they're not just for a broader audience, they're for sharing to whoever you strategically share them with.
Oh, I'm not saying, Kevin, I didn't say not do them. I think they have to be done. I just didn't want them not to be shared.
Exactly. We have to share those. And the problem is we do a lot of strategic planning and we don't do a report because we don't have the capacity, because we're overextended, blah, blah, blah. So I think that, if we get together, what you're really talking about is a strategic planning classic logic model. But those are really important because they crystallize your priorities for you and give you some indicators to measure if your priorities are being met or if they are the right priorities. And it's an iterative process. It's not like you're going to, like you said, it's not like you're going to prove something in 3 years, but it's an iterative process. And we're just so overextended, we don't do enough of it and share our results, I think.
So I agree. And I think now is this moment where the creative youth development folks have done a lot of this work. Exactly. It's there. It's really good too. And I think for me, as I start to think about next steps here, at 215, is that we really, we get a youth media caucus together to look at what's been done and to see, and to see how we can leverage that rather than repeat anything that's done. And is it relevant? How is it relevant? And what can our next steps together be? Because I think having youth media organizations involved in the guild and in the work that's going to happen is going to naturally strengthen it. And we can only hope to participate in that community that already exists. We don't want to do this alone. So just putting that out there. But I wanted to reach out to Dan and Jade and Lynn, who have not said anything yet, just to make sure that if you wanted to get in, now's the time.
I'm good. I joined late, so I'm kind of wrapping my mind around what the earlier conversation must have been based on what's said. So I'm good to go.
Okay, good. We're gonna we're recording this, and so you'll be able to listen from the beginning.
Fantastic. Okay, great.
I'll just say I'm from the Rise Center in Richmond, California. I recognize a few people on the call, but not everyone. So I just want to say I've been kind of entering this conversation wondering, well, how do we get involved? So I haven't been in the kind of national dialogue as long as some folks on this call. We're about 6.5 years old as an organization. Media is only one part of what we do. We actually have 5 departments here. We do have clinical case managers and clinicians on site to deal with the young folks who are dealing with a lot in the community. So we've always been very clear that our media program is part of our youth development model. I mean, we are a youth development organization first and foremost. We're very clear on that. Media is just one part of what we do, but it's an important part of what we do. And so kind of now that we are at a point in our organization where we're ready to kind of enter this type of national dialogue and really kind of build relationships with folks around the country and see what we're doing and what our collective impact could be. It's just really on a basic level, fundamental level. It's like, well, how do I get involved? I mean, really that simple. Like, how do I get involved? And so I feel like the last couple of calls, the call a month ago and this call is helping me kind of understand where this larger field is. I wouldn't say I'm totally clear on our role yet, but the last couple of calls, the conference in Philadelphia last year, I mean, these are helping me understand where we might fit in. So I feel like I'm actually at a point of learning, which is why I haven't been saying a lot. I'm just trying to see what's out there, what the conversations have been in the past before we entered and where they are now. So this has been helpful. I will say there is a place for us to plug in for sure. I know that. I just don't know exactly where yet. But I'm excited and thank you for everybody who's taken leadership in this realm up until this point. So,
Dan, thank you. I love everything you said, and I love you. And we live very close to each other, so we should get together and help kind of chart that out. That's great.
Yeah.
Jade, just before I jump into my thing, just want to give you the opportunity if you want it.
Surely. Hi, everybody. I'm Jade Banks. I am currently in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I've been living in New York City for the past 23 years. I represent the Smithsonian Institution as well as Mind Builders Creative Arts Center in the Bronx. For the Smithsonian Institution, I am a research coordinator for the Will to Adorn project, which explores the connection between identity and adornment in African American communities. The Smithsonian has collaborated with Mind Builders Creative Arts Center in the Bronx, whose mission is to grow youth. I've been with the Smithsonian for 5 years and Mind Builders for 7 years. And I have been thinking about our youth this entire time. That's why I've been quiet, because I have left a city of 8 million and now live in a city of 50,000.
Wow.
And I'm very disturbed by the lack of youth development programming in the capital city of Pennsylvania. Very disturbed by it. Only thing I can find is Boys and Girls Club, and that's it. I'm very happy what we have done at Mind Builders and with the Smithsonian. What we do is we identify we identify tradition bearers in our community. document them through interviewing. We teach our youth the media arts, and then we present those tradition bearers and those traditions back to the community. Our work is archived at the Library of Congress with the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. We are members of the New York State Folk Arts Roundtable, and also with the American Folklore Society.
So Jade, considering all of those, sorry to interrupt you, but considering all of those affiliations already, does it feel overwhelming to now affiliate with this, kind of with this work, or does it feel like you would have some bandwidth to actually, kind of join this? I mean, we have to have a next conversation clearly about how we kind of riff off of what creative youth development, that work, and figure this out. Is that something that you feel like, even given all of that, everything that you just said, that's a lot of commitments on your part? Is this something that you feel like you and others in your space are too strapped to do, or is there?
It's a need. It's an absolute need for it.
Okay. So
for the connection.
All right.
An absolute need, because whenever I attend the New York State Folk Arts Roundtable or the American Folklore Society, people come to me as the only representative of someone who is working with youth in media. Well, if you are working in folklore, who are you going to pass the folklore down to if you're not working with youth?
Right on, sister. That is so true.
Who are you passing it on to? And that's the challenge. It's dying off. And if you're not working with the youth, it's going to die off.
Okay.
And that's the challenge that I personally am having in New York City, and also particularly here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Well, that's a perfect segue. Thank you for that, Jay. That is the power with which you articulate that is kind of one of the exact reasons why we're doing this work. And I think why we have a responsibility, I think, to fit the needs of media, youth media organizations into the work that has been done. And just take a minute to thank the speakers here on this call who have come, all of you, and Cassandra, who wrangled everybody together, Eric and John and Heather. Thank you so much, because I think we've taken some really big steps here. And I want to go back to something, Sheila, that you mentioned. What is NAMAC's role in all this? And besides, being able to host us monthly, and this is just a done deal. We have to do this monthly, whoever shows up. And creative youth development folks, you're officially invited from now till eternity to be part of this conversation, because clearly we need you. But I think we will take some time in between calls to kind of look at the material that you've generated. I appreciate you sending me any links that I can share with our community. They'll go up on the website immediately. Because I think, as executive director, yes, I have to tend to mission drift, and I have to make sure that NAMAC's mission now we're media, arts, and culture. To me, creative youth development speaks to the culture part, and and includes media arts at the same time. And I think our new and refreshed mission of kind of facilitating collaboration, innovation, and strategic growth for the media, arts, and culture is this work. There is no mission drift in what we're doing here. I mean, I think education sometimes is a very deep hole that is difficult for me as the leader of NAMAC to get into, because school systems and all of that are just so structured and is not really where we're going. But this as a kind of beyond the borders of, educational institutions as it relates to our youth as creators in the broader culture, and how our respective organizations facilitate that voice, is exactly right on mission. And so I have, and this is for this, just at this early stage, I do have visions of NAMAC becoming a backbone organization in a collective impact kind of network, and figuring out moving forward what exactly that will look like. And I think that based on the energy on this call, I can count on all of you and the rest of our community who couldn't join the call to help figure out what that will look like. I know that I'm very interested in making sure that our voices of the young media artists are embedded deeply into those issues that they're telling stories about, and they're not marginalized off to the side and like, here's the videos the kids did, and then here's this whole movement. The movement is being energized and catalyzed by so many of these stories. And that goes for young theater artists and dancers and anyone else who, any of the young creative people who want to have that kind of voice. So we're going to be sponsoring, photography contests with large websites that put youth media directly in everybody else. Same thing with video. And I think as we move forward, that's to me where NAMAC's role is going to be as a backbone organization and as an umbrella for a diversity of voices that might not want to be involved in, because frankly, we are working on some key funding now on a climate initiative. So climate may be the first thing forward because it is funder driven. They want some climate stuff. I'm like, let's do it. Let's do it as a model and then go broad. That's fine. I'm happy to follow the money in that way if it's going to help me develop a model that works across our sectors and for all our communities. And so, that's where, I'm having NAMAC put a stake in the ground. I would like to be, maybe we should be members of the Guild official. Is the Guild a membership group?
Yes, they are.
We are.
All right, let's join.
And I actually want to say, and I'd like to invite her maybe onto the next one of these calls. We just hired a new director of membership development and engagement. Her name is Robin Walker Murphy, and she was at DreamYard Art Center in the Bronx prior to this position. And one of her, which is a CYD organization, and so this is an area very near and dear to her heart. And one of her core responsibilities in an area of growth for the Guild is actually fostering knowledge development and connection amongst networks within the bigger tent, which is the Guild. And one of those networks is CYD. Yeah. And so I think I'd love to connect her with this group because she has a personal experience of practice as a CYD practitioner and provider, and is now actually going to be chiefly responsible for helping us pull together conversations and collaborations like this. And so I'd love to introduce you all to her. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to get back to Dan's point about how do I get involved. I think Wendy, connect with Wendy and myself and with Robin once I'm introduced her to the group, but also our hope eventually with this website is that, yes, to Wendy's point, that there will need to be some type of managing entity, right, that can keep this going, but that the functionality also will enable the how to get involved question to be answered more readily, so that you'll be able to kind of develop a profile and start connecting with people without going through the gatekeepers.
Right. And thank you for that. That's awesome. And NAMAC is also developing its media policy advocacy hub that we are going to have. It's a searchable kind of map facing database where you can put in your zip code or country code and see all of the media advocacy that's going on, policy decisions, and campaigns that you can get involved in any given time. So that'll be an exciting way to sort of, do this. And I have to say about this initiative, I am really eager to have CYD I'm happy to have you guys sort of lead the charge and for us to be this, we'll hold the space of youth media and the media arts within CYD efforts, but because the work is so strong and is so, I think, really powerfully articulated and really good, from where I sit, I think it feels like a very good match. And you guys have staff and NAMAC doesn't. And so I'm like, you have a membership person? Okay, they could do that. I'm really happy to give over. And so before, John, you have something you want to share?
Just really quickly. So I'm very excited about this opportunity. And one of the things that the conversation started with is, do we fit in? Where do we fit in? You do fit in, and it's important that you fit in. And what I'll just say in sort of a relationship thing is that Cassandra had invited me to present at the last NAMEC conference. And we're members. I had never been, but when I got there, I was like, oh, my community, my tribe. You know, the reality is that we all fit in so many wonderful parallel ways that it would be really important for you to participate in this work.
Great. Well, I think that's a fantastic note to end on, and it is exactly 2:30/5:30. So you guys, thank you for another extraordinary conversation. Cassandra, thank you for organizing it. Kathleen, you stayed on the whole call. I consider that a personal win. So
great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and for all of you, I will send you guys the link to the recording if you want to share it with anyone in your organizations, and I'll reach out to you for a little caucusing around the CYD agenda items and the documentation, and let us generate something that feels that we're fully in there, because I think this invitation is really loud and clear. So thank you all so much, and talk very soon.
Thank you.
Okay.
Wendy, how long will the recording be available?
Forever on the website.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, no worries.
And Wendy, can you share that with us too, so that I can forward that on to our staff?
Oh, of course. Everyone on this call will get the link.
Right. Perfect.
Once I get it, I just have to get it compressed and uploaded onto our site. And Youth Media Reporter published the last one, so maybe I'll reach back out to them, and we'll get it on there as well.
Thanks so much.
Thank you
Bye,
again
everyone.
very much. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.